Welcome to ONS Energy Talks. My name is Ingvild Mæland and I'm the Program Director of the ONS Foundation. Today we will talk about the Northern Light project. It's a story about carbon capture and storage. It's a story about front-end technology. It's a story about cross-sector collaboration. And it's also a story about a future potential production of hydrogen. To help us shed light on this, we have with us Steinar Eikås. He's the Vice President of Low Carbon Solutions in Equinor. Steinar, very much welcome to you.
Thank you so much.
This is such an interesting project, so let's just jump right into it. But let's start with an overall level. We live in a world where it's important to get control of our emissions to air and find low carbon solutions. Could you explain to us where you see CCS being an important piece of the puzzle in this picture?
Yes, I think it's very important because what we see today is really strong efforts and success within the renewable space, within wind solutions, battery solutions, and solar solutions. But what's important to recognize is that these solutions only produce electricity, and the world needs much more than clean electricity. We also need what we call clean molecules, and we also need to clean up industries where the emissions are not a source or result of the energy production. For instance, the cement industry, where the emissions are a result of the process itself. So we need to decarbonize everything. Remember that the goals now are not only to reduce the emissions by 80%, but to reduce them by 100%. And that means that industries no longer can hide in the remaining 20% and say that this is not a matter for us. We also need to decarbonize. So everybody needs to clean up their processes. And then CCS is a key solution to help those industries which cannot electrify and which cannot rely on renewable electricity. So there's quite a large segment which can use CCS to manage their CO2 emissions.
That's interesting. And building on that, the Northern Light project is one of the examples, or one of the answers that industry is providing into that picture. Tell us the story about the background for the Northern Light project.
So the background is that we have always had a desire to manage CO2 by kind of reversing the oil and gas production, you can say. So today we are mastering producing oil and gas, extracting that from the ground. But CCS is basically the reverse, using that competence, the technology, to take CO2 back and store it permanently into the same kind of reservoirs as we collect oil and gas from today. And Equinor has more than 20 years of experience from Sleipner and Snøhvit with this. And we also have a test facility at Mongstad. And Northern Lights is really an initiative from Gassnova to take this a step further, to collect CO2 or capture CO2 at the waste management facility in Oslo, Klemetsrud, and a cement production facility in Brevik. And then the concept is to transport the CO2 from those locations to a location on the west coast of Norway, close to Bergen or Kolsnes, where the CO2 will be pumped and injected for permanent storage. And the concept allows for much more than these two capture plants. Basically, because we are transporting CO2 by ship, these ships can go to any location, for instance, in Europe, and collect CO2. So the whole purpose here is to start and demonstrate the technology with the two first capture plants in Norway, but then to rapidly expand to collect CO2 from Norway with the same concept.
It's interesting, yeah, that you're saying you started by building on the expertise and the knowledge you have from the oil and gas industry and injecting CO2 kind of in Sleipner, as you mentioned. But you also explain it's quite a complex infrastructure that is required to make this project work. What has been and what will be the biggest hurdle in order to get it into production and into action?
So that is correct. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built, and of course this will cost. And I think the cost part is the most challenging part because the technology already exists. This is more a matter of finding business models which can justify the cost of doing this for those companies that are involved. And a very important part of this solution is that the Norwegian state contributes with funding in this process to make this acceptable in terms of profitability for both the capture plants as well as those companies that will store the CO2. But from a technological perspective, this is not rocket science. This has more or less been done before. There are some minor technological gaps, but not the large ones. So it's much more a matter of finding the right commercial model for this.
What I find interesting is building on a kind of joint venture thinking from kind of the activity on the Norwegian continental shelf, and Equinor you are having with you, you've got Total and Shell in this huge project. How important has the kind of cross-industry and also within industry collaboration been to make it happen?
It's very important because of several reasons. Of course, it is important to have partnerships to kind of challenge the solutions and to find the most cost-efficient ways to design and build this. It's also important in terms of sharing risk. It's important in terms of the competence involved. But I think also to have European companies as part of this, as this is not only a Norwegian kind of based concept, will help us when we are kind of promoting this towards Europe and want third-party kind of industrial sites in Europe to use this. Then, of course, it's also a benefit to have international companies as part of this project. So it's really key. And Shell and Total has done a fantastic job in terms of sharing their experience in this project.
And a big part of this is also trying to find the right industrial customers kind of to provide the CO2. What kind of feedback or reply have you got on the European continent when you were out seeking for the CO2 sources?
So what we have seen is that there's always been an interest for this, because what you have in Europe is kind of most industries, they have on their agenda that they want to reduce the CO2 footprint. But what they can do themselves is, of course, to capture the CO2. But once they have captured the CO2, they didn't really have a place to get rid of it before. But now they will have that. And what we see is that once we kind of mature this project and move towards kind of an investment decision, the interest from Europe has become stronger and stronger. So I don't think there will be any problem in kind of filling up this capacity based on all the interest that we have today. But of course, these interest needs to be materialized in contracts and agreements. That needs to be done still. But everything is looking really positive when it comes to how this will be utilized in Europe.
One of the things that is also relevant in this picture is that there's a great interest from hydrogen, as we see as an energy carrier. If and when this value chain is realized, I know you're also looking to putting the hydrogen production into this value chain. Can you explain how you will do this?
So kind of the two initial capture plants are kind of basically both non-oil and gas. So it's waste management and it is cement. So that CO2 is not originating from any kind of carbon fuel. But what we see is that within the energy system, we need to provide clean energy in a much broader range than just renewable electricity. So basically we need what we call clean molecules. And the best way to do that is to provide clean hydrogen. And then we can use hydrogen as it is, or we can use hydrogen as a building block for other molecules like ammonia, for instance. And today, there's a lot of hydrogen being produced in the world, and it's used for fertilizer production, for methanol production, and within refineries. And the way it is produced is that it's based on natural gas. And in that process, there's a lot of CO2 which is just released to the atmosphere. So the concept is that this can easily be captured because it's highly concentrated. And once it is captured, and once we have the Northern Light infrastructure, we can store it permanently. So basically what we can do is that we can produce hydrogen from natural gas as we do today, but without the CO2 footprint. And then, of course, what we need to do is to see if we can replace natural gas with hydrogen in the markets. And that is kind of the core of a lot of projects that we are working on at the moment with our customers. We're trying to see if they can adjust their process so they can use clean hydrogen instead of natural gas. And if we succeed in doing that, we can basically, based on the natural gas value chain, we can offer clean energy in the form of hydrogen, and we can manage the CO2 through projects like Northern Lights.
So what you're saying is that in order to kind of get this hydrogen production rolling, you need to make sure you have a market for it. Kind of starting in a smaller scale, but it's a big investment needed. So you need quite a big market to make it realize. What other elements is important in order to really realize the production of blue hydrogen? Is there enough political willingness, for example?
So we clearly see that there is a willingness. If you look 2 years back, all the talk about hydrogen was for renewable hydrogen, so based on electrolysis and renewable electricity, the so-called green hydrogen. After we have worked on these concepts that we in Equinor have promoted, we have seen a more and more acceptance for what is called blue hydrogen. So that is hydrogen from natural gas with CCS. So just as clean as green hydrogen, but a different origin. So the acceptance has to kind of course, be there from the political side, because the first projects of these kind will not be commercial, because adding this on top of the capture and the CCS part on top of hydrogen will add cost. Replacing gas with hydrogen will also add cost. So unless there are commercial incentives, this will basically not happen. So what we do is that we demonstrate how this can be done. We design these processes. We show when it can be done and how much it will cost. And then, of course, how clean it can be. And kind of incentives for investing in these projects is really the bottleneck or the hurdle that we need to pass. And what we see is that, for instance, the kind of progress we have in Northern Lights and so on, that showing that things are being built is helping a lot, because politicians, they want to see something that can materialize before they will commit to fund these projects. So kind of the industry needs to go ahead and show the world what is possible to do and demonstrate maybe the first kind of steps a little bit on their own initiative. And then the next step will have to be taken by the politicians to design a framework which can absorb the costs, which can allow kind of these concepts to be competitive, I would say, with the current emitting projects. So it's really a matter of political will, but also industry leadership to make this happen.
Maybe you mentioned it, but let's elaborate a little bit on where do you see the biggest potential for the blue hydrogen markets? Let's say, for example, especially in Europe, which segment are we into?
So I think the way we see it in Equinor, and we may differ a little bit from other companies who mainly target the transport sector, but we actually think that hydrogen can more or less do anything that natural gas does today. So basically, looking at the current natural gas markets, you could have like a vision of where hydrogen can go in the future. I'm not saying that all of this will be replaced, but the market potential is there. So you're looking at heat, so heating homes, cooking food in those countries that is based on gas, like UK and Belgium and the Netherlands. You're looking at what we call dispatchable power production, and that is basically producing electricity on demand. So when the wind does not blow. Today, we do that with gas. You can turn it on off like a switch, more or less. And we can do the same with hydrogen without any emissions. And maybe the most exciting part is the industry, where a lot of natural gas is being used today. But you also have industries that use coal. And one of those examples are within steel. So steel making is using a lot of coal today and is one of the kind of worst emitters worldwide and in Europe also. And one of the concepts we are working on is to replace coal with hydrogen. And if we succeed with doing so, we will not only eliminate the emissions, but we will also create a new market for both hydrogen and, of course, then also for natural gas. A market currently being served by coal, which we can add on to a market being supplied from natural gas and hydrogen. So there's a lot of exciting things going on. And this is not only about cutting the emissions, it's also about expanding the market potential for Norwegian natural gas.
I hear all of you saying. In addition to that, I hear jobs and activity and the service sector, and so that's also worth taking notice of. I just want to elaborate a little bit. You talk about the Northern Light project. It's a huge kind of step when it comes to establishing a CCS value chain. It's important for Norway, but it has great potential beyond our borders. Can you explain where you see the biggest upside when it comes to global outreach?
So I think what we can do through the Northern Lights kind of for the world, if you like, is to demonstrate this in reality, how a CCS project, and not only a project, but a flexible CCS project can operate. And hopefully it will lower the threshold for similar projects in other parts of the world. We also see other projects, of course, being developed in parallel to the Northern Lights, but Northern Lights is unique that we have kind of disconnected the capture from the storage. Most of the other projects that are being designed today have a one-to-one relationship between the source and the sink. So we disconnect those two in Northern Lights. We use the ships. It's a little bit more expensive, of course, because we need to kind of liquefy the CO2 and transport it. But it's so flexible, and it makes kind of the threshold much lower for, I would say, medium-sized industry to test out the CCS in their process. And then, of course, for the bigger industries, they can start with the Northern Light concept, and then they can expand with a pipeline solution and a more dedicated in kind of the end game. But Northern Lights is a very important part of kind of the innovating piece of decarbonizing industry because it lowers the threshold so much compared to what has been done in the past.
It's very interesting, and what I take out of it is that the Northern Light project cannot save the world itself, but at least it can help the world to save itself. So, one more question on hydrogen. What do you think we will see 10 years ahead? Where we will be on the hydrogen? Because I think we are on kind of in the starting point of a huge development that is coming, and it's been talking about for a long time. But where are we, and where will we be in 10 years' time?
So I think it's fair to be kind of realistic, even though I'm an optimist in this area. But what I hope, at least in 10 years, is that we have demonstration projects within all kind of the major sectors within the energy system. So that we have, for instance, demonstrated that we can produce clean steel with hydrogen, that we can produce dispatchable electricity when the wind doesn't blow, that we can supply hydrogen to heat, to also, I would believe, the maritime sector is a key area, in particular in Norway, where hydrogen will play a major role. And then I think also liquid hydrogen is going to be key there. So that you will have these solutions demonstrated in 10 years within all these sectors is what I hope to see. But still, I think it's realistic to say that natural gas and also oil-based energy solutions will still dominate, simply because what we need to solve is so kind of large and complex that it will take time. But to demonstrate how it can be done, how it can be scaled up, and then hopefully also, I think within hydrogen, what I hope to see is that we can start to kind of generate what we call hydrogen backbones, or kind of main infrastructure, and that you will see green hydrogen also delivering into those systems when you have cheap electricity. So for instance, when you have lots of wind in Europe, power prices are very low. It makes sense to produce hydrogen from that clean electricity. But unfortunately, the kind of volumes are not big enough to establish an infrastructure. And hopefully we have established that with blue hydrogen within 10 years. And that you will also see that this can absorb green hydrogen in large quantities. That we kind of see these two being combined as solutions, and kind of to get experience for how that can work in the future. That's what I hope we can see in 10 years.
So I see as a like a realistic optimist, but you are really still, you think that the market will be there in 10 years. Steinar, thank you for sharing your thoughts on the Northern Light project and the effects on the carbon emissions, effects on technology, and also how we can look forward to a positive development within hydrogen. Thank you, Steinar, and thank you to the ONS listener. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.